Did you know that the Knights Templar were once so powerful they created the world's first international banking system? So powerful that popes and kings sought their favor, and so wealthy they could fund entire wars. But what if I told you that their incredible power, their secret rituals, and their vast fortune would ultimately lead to their brutal, fiery destruction? How did God's holiest soldiers become the most wanted men in the medieval world? For nearly 200 years, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon were the ultimate paradox. Better known as the Knights Templar, they were a holy brotherhood of knights who took solemn vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, all while being the most formidable and disciplined fighting force of their age. In this video, we will unravel the complete, intriguing history of this medieval order that has captured imaginations for centuries. But this is more than just a story of battles and castles. It's a story of secrets. Were they the guardians of Christianity's most sacred relics, like the Holy Grail itself? Did they possess forbidden knowledge, discovered beneath the Temple of Solomon? We will journey back to the dusty roads of the Holy Land where they were founded, ride with them into the heat of the Crusades, uncover the ingenious financial system that made them unimaginably wealthy, and finally, witness their dramatic and bloody downfall. This is the bizarre, true story of the Knights Templar, a tale of faith, power, betrayal, and mystery that has echoed through the ages. So, get comfortable, and let's delve into one of history's most fascinating and controversial chapters. To understand the Templars, we have to transport ourselves back to the early 12th century. The First Crusade, against all odds, had been a success for the Christian forces of Europe. Jerusalem was in their hands. But the victory was fragile. Imagine being a pilgrim at that time. You've survived a perilous sea voyage, and now you face a 40-mile trek from the port city of Jaffa to the holy walls of Jerusalem. The roads are little more than dirt tracks winding through hostile territory, and every shadow could hide a bandit waiting to rob, kidnap, or kill you. For the thousands of unarmed, pious Christians making the journey, it was a terrifying ordeal. In the midst of this chaos, a veteran French knight of the First Crusade, Hugues de Payens, proposed a truly radical solution. Alongside 8 of his kinsmen, he founded a new kind of order in 1119, a brotherhood of monks who would trade their prayer books for swords. The very idea was controversial. A monk's duty was to pray for the souls of men, not to spill their blood. But their mission was undeniably noble, to dedicate their lives to protecting these vulnerable pilgrims. They took vows of poverty, owning no land or possessions, and their famous emblem depicted 2 knights on a single horse, a powerful symbol of their humility and shared purpose. King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, desperate for a solution to his bandit problem, was so impressed he granted them a headquarters in a wing of his palace on the Temple Mount, the holiest site in Jerusalem, believed to be built atop the ruins of the Temple of Solomon. From this sacred place, they took their name, the Knights Templar. For nearly a decade, they remained a small, obscure group. But their destiny changed forever when they gained the support of the most influential man in Christendom, Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard was a theological superstar, and he wrote a powerful treatise called In Praise of the New Knighthood, which was essentially a brilliant piece of PR. He argued that the Templars were a new breed of holy warrior, fighting a righteous war against evil. With his blessing, the Council of Troyes officially recognized the Templar Order in 1129. The effect was instantaneous. The floodgates of patronage opened. Noble families across Europe, eager to do their part for the Holy Land and secure their place in heaven, showered the Templars with gifts. It started with money and land, but it quickly grew. Entire farms in France, vineyards in Spain, mills in England, ports, ships, and even a percentage of a village's annual harvest were all signed over to the order. Young noblemen, eager for adventure and salvation, lined up to join, signing over their personal fortunes in the process. This created the central paradox of their existence. How could an order, whose members had taken a personal vow of poverty, become one of the wealthiest institutions on the planet? Their answer was pure genius. They built a vast, sophisticated financial network. A lord in England could entrust his fortune to the London Temple, receive a coded letter of credit, travel unarmed to the Holy Land, and present that letter in Jerusalem to withdraw his funds in local currency. It was the 12th century equivalent of a wire transfer, and it was revolutionary. This system made them the most trusted bankers in the known world. Kings and popes entrusted their finances to them. Their military power grew in lockstep with their wealth. They became the special forces of the Crusader armies, the first into battle and the last to retreat. But their success was breeding a new kind of danger. They were becoming a state within a state, a multinational corporation with its own private army, accountable to no king, no bishop, only to the Pope in Rome. Their secrecy, their immense wealth, and their unparalleled power began to stir a potent cocktail of fear, jealousy, and suspicion in the royal courts of Europe. The very foundations of their success were slowly becoming the reasons for their downfall. The official birth of the Knights Templar, as a force recognized by the Church, can be pinpointed to the Council of Troyes in France, in the year 1129. This was their moment. Under the guidance of the charismatic Abbot Bernard of Clairvaux, the order was given its foundational document, the Latin Rule. This was not just a set of guidelines. It was the very constitution of their souls, a meticulously detailed code of conduct that would govern every aspect of a Templar's life, transforming them from mere soldiers into instruments of God's will. The rule consisted of 72 clauses, and it was a masterpiece of spiritual and military engineering. It dictated their prayers, their periods of mandatory silence, and their diet. They were to eat meat no more than 3 days a week to discipline the flesh. It prescribed their clothing. The iconic white mantle, symbolizing purity and chastity, was reserved for the elite knights, while the sergeants, who were of non-noble birth, wore black or brown. And it famously dictated their appearance. Templars were to wear their beards long, a sign of virility and wisdom, but keep their hair short, so they could see clearly in battle. Every detail was designed to strip away individual vanity and forge a unified, disciplined brotherhood. Bernard of Clairvaux's support was the key that unlocked their destiny. In his famous treatise, In Praise of the New Knighthood, he painted a vivid picture of the Templar as the perfect Christian warrior. He contrasted them with secular knights, whom he accused of fighting for pride, wealth, and vainglory. The secular knight, Bernard wrote, who kills a man, sins. But the Templar? He is a knight of Christ, and when he slays a malefactor, he is not a man-killer, but if I may so put it, a killer of evil. This was a theological masterstroke. It morally justified their holy violence, and made joining the order one of the most pious acts a nobleman could perform. With this papal blessing and powerful marketing, the Templar Order exploded in popularity. They established a sophisticated internal hierarchy to manage their rapid growth. At the top was the Grand Master, the absolute commander based in Jerusalem. Below him were the Seneschal, his deputy, and the Marshal, who was in charge of all military operations and individual horses. The order was divided into provinces, each run by a master, who oversaw a network of local chapters called preceptories or commanderies. These preceptories were the backbone of the Templar war machine. They were a combination of monastery, recruitment depot, and agricultural estate. They dotted the landscape of Europe, generating vast revenues from farming, milling, and vineyards, which were then funneled east to fund the endless war in the Holy Land. The initiation ceremony for a new brother was a solemn, and crucially, a secret affair. Conducted at night in a locked chapel, it was witnessed only by other Templars. The recruit would be asked a series of questions. Was he a virgin? Was he married? Did he have any debts? He had to swear to dedicate his life to the order, to obey the Grand Master without question, and to never flee from battle. He would then be accepted into the Brotherhood, shedding his old life to be reborn as a soldier of Christ. It was this secrecy, this exclusion of the outside world from their most sacred rituals, that would later be twisted and used against them with devastating effect. For now, though, it only added to their mystique and their allure. They were God's chosen warriors, and their ascent had only just begun. For nearly 2 centuries, the sound of the Templar war horn was a promise of salvation for their allies and a harbinger of doom for their enemies. In an age where feudal armies were often a chaotic, undisciplined mob of glory-seeking nobles, the Templars were something new, something terrifying. A professional, unified, and fanatically disciplined fighting force. Their primary weapon, the one that would define them in the annals of military history, was the devastating charge of their heavy cavalry. Imagine the scene from the perspective of a Saracen soldier. First, you see them on the horizon, a silent, shimmering line of white mantles. They advance at a walk, then a trot, their formation as tight as a spearhead. They carry no personal banners, only the black and white bucient, snapping in the wind. Then, the command is given. 1,000 pounds of horse and armored man, multiplied by hundreds, breaks into a thunderous, earth-shaking gallop. Lances, 12 feet long, are lowered in perfect unison. They don't scream or shout like other knights. They are a silent, unstoppable wave of steel, aimed at the heart of your formation. This was not just a military tactic. It was a psychological weapon, designed to shatter an enemy's morale before the first blow even landed. This discipline was forged in the crucible of their Latin rule and years of brutal training. A new recruit, often a teenager from a noble house, would have his worldly life stripped away. His training was relentless, focusing on unit cohesion over individual prowess. He learned to fight as one part of a larger machine, to obey the orders of the marshal without question. Disobedience was met with harsh penance, being forced to eat from the floor, public floggings, or even expulsion. This stood in stark contrast to the secular knights, who would often break ranks in a selfish dash for glory or loot, leaving their armies vulnerable. The Templar banner was their anchor. As long as the bucient flew, they were forbidden to retreat or stop fighting. If a knight was cut off, he was to fight his way back to the nearest Christian banner. This code created a reputation for unshakable resolve that made them the elite shock troops and reliable rearguard of any crusader army. Their finest hour, a moment that cemented their legend, came in 1177 at the Battle of Montgassard. The great Muslim leader, Saladin, at the height of his power, had invaded the Kingdom of Jerusalem with a massive army of over 26,000 soldiers. The Crusader force was laughably small, led by the 16-year-old King Baldwin IV, a boy king whose body was already being ravaged by leprosy. With him were only a few hundred knights, including a contingent of just 80 Templars led by their Grand Master, Odo of St. Amand. The situation was hopeless. But Baldwin, carried into battle on a litter, his hands bandaged, ordered the holiest relic in Christendom, a fragment of the true cross, to be raised. Inspired, the tiny Crusader force charged. The 80 Templars, a white-clad spear tip, smashed directly into Saladin's personal Mamluk bodyguard, creating a vortex of chaos that ripped through the entire Saracen army. The result was a stunning, almost miraculous victory. Saladin himself barely escaped, and his army was shattered. The legend of Templar invincibility was born. But their history was not just one of open-field battles. They were crucial in siege warfare. During the siege of Ascalon in 1153, a vital port city, It was the Templars who breached the walls first after a siege tower was burned, creating a fire that caused a section of the wall to collapse. Grand Master Bernard de Tremolay led 40 of his knights into the breach. In a controversial move, they fought to hold the breach alone, not allowing other crusaders to follow, perhaps to claim the city's riches for the order. They were surrounded and killed, but their sacrifice created the opening that allowed the city to be taken the next day. And their influence extended far beyond the Holy Land. In Spain, the Templars were a cornerstone of the Reconquista, the centuries-long struggle to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from the Moorish caliphates. They were granted vast tracts of land and formidable castles like the Castle of Miravet in Catalonia, which became their provincial headquarters. They fought alongside the kings of Aragon and Portugal, their disciplined tactics proving just as effective against the Moors as they were against the Saracens. However, their pride and refusal to retreat could also lead to catastrophe. The Battle of La Fourby in 1244 was a disaster that dwarfed even the losses at Hattin. A combined Crusader and Syrian army was annihilated by a superior Egyptian and Khwarezmian force. The military orders formed the core of the army and were wiped out. Of the 300 Templar knights who entered the battle, only around 30 survived. This single battle crippled the military strength of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a blow from which it would never truly recover. Each defeat was a devastating blow, as every Templar knight represented a colossal investment in years of training and the finest arms and armor money could buy. Beyond the battlefield, their true, lasting power was etched in stone and gold. The Templars were master builders and logistical geniuses. They constructed and garrisoned a network of colossal castles throughout the Holy Land and Europe. Fortresses like Chastel-Pellerin, Athlet, on the coast were marvels of military engineering. Built on a peninsula with a massive defensive wall cutting it off from the mainland, it had its own harbor and could be supplied by sea, making it virtually impregnable. These castles featured concentric walls, deadly kill zones, and massive keeps, projecting Christian power deep into hostile territory. And to pay for this endless war, they relied on their unparalleled financial empire. The Church officially forbade the lending of money for interest, a practice known as usury. But the Templars, with their brilliant legal minds, found loopholes. They structured loans as rent on property or charged massive administrative fees, allowing them to become the de facto bankers of Europe while remaining technically pious. Imagine you are a French baron wanting to join the crusade. You could entrust your entire estate to the Templars for management. They would collect your revenues, protect your land, and provide you with a letter of credit to fund your campaign in the East. The Paris Temple became the treasury of the French monarchy. The London Temple served a similar function for the English crown. Their power also extended to the sea. The Templars owned a large fleet of ships, dominating the Mediterranean. These ships transported pilgrims, war horses, supplies, and most importantly, treasure. They offered a package deal for pilgrims: safe passage to the Holy Land on a Templar ship, protection on the roads by Templar knights, and a secure place to store their money. This combination of military prowess, architectural genius, naval power, and economic dominance made them the most powerful and influential organization of the Middle Ages. They were, for a time, more powerful than kings, and seemingly untouchable. The end of the Knights Templar did not come on a sun-scorched battlefield. It began with the thunder of collapsing stone and the roar of the sea. In 1291, the city of Acre, the last Christian bastion in the Crusader states, fell to the overwhelming forces of the Mamluk Sultanate. The siege was a brutal, month-long affair. The Templar Grand Master, Guillaume de Beaujeu, was killed on the ramparts, a mortal wound from a poisoned arrow. His last words were reportedly, "I am not running away, I am dead." The final stand took place in their massive seaside fortress. As Mamluk sappers undermined the walls, the great tower collapsed, killing the last of the defenders and taking a great number of the enemy with them. The Crusades were over. The dream of a Christian East was dead, buried in the rubble of Acre. The surviving Templars retreated to the island of Cyprus. And there, they faced a chilling existential crisis. Their entire purpose for nearly 2 centuries had been to wage holy war. Now, with no war to fight, what were they? They were not idle. They were actively planning a new crusade, building their fleet, and even launched a small, ill-fated invasion of the island of Ruad off the Syrian coast. But to the kings and commoners of Europe, they looked like a massive, professional army with no mission, a colossal, tax-exempt multinational corporation with no clear function. Dangerous questions began to be whispered. Why do we still need the Knights Templar? Why does this immensely powerful and secretive order still exist? This vulnerability was not lost on one of the most ambitious, calculating, and ruthless monarchs in European history, King Philip IV of France. Known as Philip the Fair for his handsome, emotionless features, not his sense of justice, Philip was a new breed of king. He was a zealot for the idea of the centralized nation-state, believing himself to be God's chosen instrument to forge a powerful and unified France. Anything that stood in the way of his absolute power, be it the papacy, the nobility, or an independent military order, had to be brought to heel or destroyed. And he was perpetually, cripplingly in debt. His wars against England and Flanders had emptied the royal coffers. He had already debased the currency, and in 1306, he had all the Jews in France arrested on a single day, seized their assets, and expelled them from his kingdom. This was a dress rehearsal for what was to come. His cold eyes now fell upon the Templars. They were his primary bankers, and he owed them a fortune. They were an intolerable challenge to his vision of absolute monarchy. And most importantly, they were fabulously wealthy. Philip's chief minister was the ruthless lawyer Guillaume de Nogaret, a man with a personal, vindictive motive. His own family had been persecuted by the church for heresy, and he harbored a deep resentment for any power that challenged the authority of the king. Together, they crafted a list of charges based on the rumors of a disgruntled ex-Templar, twisting the secrecy of the Templar initiation into something monstrous. Let's examine the main accusations. First, that recruits were forced to deny Jesus Christ and spit on the crucifix. While shocking, some historians have theorized this might have been a bizarre form of psychological training, a test to see how a knight would react if captured and tortured by the enemy. But to the medieval public, it was unforgivable blasphemy. Second, the worship of an idol, a severed head called Baphomet. No such idol was ever found in any Templar property. The name itself was likely a French corruption of Muhammad or Muhammad, tapping into the common Christian misconception that Muslims were idol worshippers. It was a charge designed to paint the Templars as not just heretics, but pagans in league with the enemy. Third, they were accused of institutionalized homosexuality, symbolized by the obscene kisses of the initiation rite. This was a mortal sin, a charge designed to cause maximum public revulsion. Working in absolute secrecy, Philip's ministers prepared sealed orders to be sent to every royal agent across the entire kingdom. The plan was audacious, requiring breathtaking coordination. On a single day, all Templars in France were to be arrested, their properties seized, and their assets frozen. The date chosen for this unprecedented operation was Friday, October 13, 1307. Before dawn on that fateful day, Philip's men struck. The knights, who had faced down entire armies, were caught completely by surprise. Hundreds, including the aging Grand Master Jacques de Molay, were arrested and thrown into royal dungeons. The first phase of Philip's plan was a stunning success. Now came the harder part. He needed to prove their guilt. For that, he turned to his royal inquisitors, who employed the darkest tools of the medieval state. They used the rack to dislocate limbs, the strapado to tear shoulders from their sockets, and the trial by fire, where a victim's greased feet were slowly roasted over hot coals. Under this agony, men will confess to anything. One inquisitor in Paris boasted that 36 Templars had died under his interrogation. Even the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, an old man in his 60s, broke under the torment and confessed, a massive propaganda victory for the king. The Pope at the time, Clement V, was a Frenchman who owed his election to Philip and had moved the papacy from Rome to Avignon, making him a virtual prisoner of the French crown. Initially, Clement was outraged. Philip had arrested members of a papal order, a direct assault on his authority. He issued a papal bull demanding the prisoners be turned over to the church. But Philip masterfully outmaneuvered him. He used the horrifying, coerced confessions to blackmail the Pope. He also threatened to launch a posthumous trial of a previous Pope, Boniface VIII, for heresy, an act that would have thrown the entire church into chaos. Trapped and terrified, Clement buckled. In 1308, he issued the bull Faciens Misericordiam, which ordered all Christian monarchs to arrest the Templars in their own lands. Philip's illegal power grab now had the veneer of papal legitimacy. The trap had been sprung, and the fate of the Knights Templar was sealed. For a brief, flickering moment, it seemed as though the Knights Templar might survive. After the initial wave of arrests and torture by King Philip's men, Pope Clement V finally managed to assert his authority. He took control of the investigation, sending his own cardinals to interview the prisoners away from the king's torturers. And in the relative safety of the church's custody, a remarkable thing happened. The Templars began to find their courage. Hundreds of knights who had confessed under duress now recanted their testimony. They told the papal commissioners harrowing stories of the torture they had endured. One knight, Ponce de Gizzi, testified that he had been held in a pit for 3 months, with his hands tied so tightly behind his back that the blood flowed from his fingernails. He confessed, he said, only when they told him that the Grand Master himself had already done so. Another knight showed the commissioners 2 bones that had fallen from his heels after they were roasted over a fire. A wave of defiance swept through the imprisoned knights. They began to organize a legal defense, preparing to argue their case at the upcoming church council. Jacques de Molay, who had been shamed by his own coarse confession, also found his resolve, writing to his fellow Templars, urging them to stand firm and tell the truth. It seemed that Philip's plot, built on a foundation of lies and pain, was about to unravel. But Philip the Fair was not a man to be outmaneuvered. He held a trump card, and he played it with sickening brutality. He declared that any Templar who had confessed and then recanted their confession was a relapsed heretic. And the punishment for a relapsed heretic was death by fire, a sentence that could be carried out by the state without the Pope's permission. To make this happen, he turned to one of his loyal puppets, Philippe de Marigny, the newly appointed Archbishop of Senators. On a grim morning in May 1310, a provincial church council was convened in Paris. It was a sham. The council swiftly condemned 54 Knights Templar as relapsed heretics. That very evening, the 54 knights were loaded onto carts and taken to a field outside the city. They were bound to stakes, with wood and charcoal piled high around their feet. They were offered a final chance. Reaffirm your original confessions, and you will be spared. To a man, they refused. As the executioners lit the fires, the knights began to sing hymns. Eyewitnesses reported that they endured their agonizing deaths with such courage, calling out the name of Christ from the flames, that the crowd was moved to tears and wonder. The message was brutally clear. This was an act of judicial terrorism, designed to silence all opposition. The legal defense of the Templar order collapsed overnight. No one else dared to recant. The remaining knights, broken and terrified, fell silent. With all dissent crushed, the stage was set for the final act. The Council of Vienne, convened in 1311 to decide the ultimate fate of the order. It was supposed to be a grand ecclesiastical council, but it was held under a shadow of intimidation. King Philip himself marched to Vienne at the head of an army, a clear threat to any churchman who might consider voting against him. The council was deadlocked. Despite the coerced confessions, the majority of the bishops were not convinced of the Templars' guilt and were reluctant to condemn an entire holy order. But Philip needed a victory. He needed the Templar wealth. He pressured Pope Clement relentlessly. Finally, in the spring of 1312, Clement devised a political solution. He would not declare the Templars guilty of heresy. There was simply not enough legitimate evidence. Instead, he invoked his absolute papal authority. In the papal bull Vox in Excelso, Clement announced that, for the good of the Church and to avoid any further scandal, he was dissolving the Knights Templar. Not by legal verdict, but by apostolic decree. It was a legal sidestep that damned the order without ever proving them guilty. The Knights Templar, after 193 years of service, were officially erased from existence. Their vast wealth was ordered to be transferred to their rivals, the Knights Hospitaller. But Philip made sure to collect his prize. He claimed an enormous administrative fee for the costs of his investigation, seizing a massive portion of their assets in France. In the end, his crusade against the Templars had been a stunningly successful, if bloody, financial transaction. For 7 years, the leaders of the order, Grand Master Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charny, the preceptor of Normandy, had languished in prison. Their final fate was to be decided on March 18, 1314. A scaffold was erected in the square in front of Notre Dame Cathedral. The two old knights, frail and broken by years of imprisonment, were led out before a crowd and a commission of cardinals. The cardinals read out the final verdict. Because of their confessions, they were sentenced to a life of perpetual imprisonment. But as the sentence was read, something inside Jacques de Molay finally snapped. He and Geoffrey de Charny suddenly stood up, interrupting the cardinals. In a loud, clear voice that carried across the square, de Molay declared that his confession had been a lie, forced from him by the agony of torture. He proclaimed the absolute innocence and holiness of the Templar order. Geoffrey de Charny joined him, shouting his own innocence. King Philip, who was watching the proceedings, was enraged. This public, last-minute defiance was a direct challenge to his authority, an act that could undo years of his careful propaganda. Bypassing the authority of the cardinals completely, he made a snap decision. He declared the two men to be relapsed heretics, and ordered them to be burned at the stake that very evening. As dusk fell over Paris, de Molay and de Charny were taken to a small island in the middle of the river Seine. A pyre had been hastily constructed. The old Grand Master, showing a final, incredible reserve of courage, made two requests: that his hands be unbound so he could die in a position of prayer, and that his body be turned to face the Cathedral of Notre Dame. As the executioners lit the slow-burning fire, Jacques de Molay raised his voice one last time. And from the flames he issued a chilling, prophetic curse. "God knows who is wrong and has sinned," he cried. "Soon a calamity will occur to those who have condemned us to death. Pope Clement, King Philip, within a year and a day, I summon you to appear before the judgment seat of God to receive your just punishment. Cursed, cursed. You shall all be cursed to the 13th generation." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar was consumed by the fire. His curse, however, would echo through history. Just over 1 month later, Pope Clement V died from a sudden, agonizing illness. And before the year was out, King Philip the Fair, while out on a hunt, suffered a fall from his horse and died from a stroke a few weeks later. The 2 men who had destroyed the Knights Templar were dead. The curse had been fulfilled. So, what is the final legacy of the Knights Templar? In the end, their story is a tragic epic of how a brotherhood founded on piety and poverty rose to become a global superpower, only to be brought down by the greed and paranoia of a king. They began as humble protectors of pilgrims, a noble mission that, through a combination of battlefield prowess and financial genius, morphed into an institution of unimaginable wealth and influence. They were the world's first multinational corporation, pioneering innovations in banking that would lay the groundwork for modern finance. They were the elite special forces of their age, whose discipline and courage were legendary. And they were master builders, whose castles stood as monuments to their power. But their very success became their undoing. Their secrecy, once a mark of their mystique, was twisted into a weapon against them. Their wealth, once used to fund the defense of Christendom, became a prize too tempting for a bankrupt monarch to ignore. And their independence, their allegiance only to the Pope, was an intolerable challenge to the new age of absolute kings. The destruction of the Templars was a brutal, calculated act of state-sponsored persecution, a dark turning point where the power of a secular king proved strong enough to bend the papacy to his will and destroy one of the Church's most celebrated orders. But did they truly disappear? While the order was officially dissolved, the story doesn't end in the flames of Paris. In many parts of Europe, the Templars were found innocent. In Portugal, they were simply rebranded, their assets and members reformed into a new order, the Order of Christ, which would later play a key role in funding Portugal's Age of Discovery. In Scotland, where papal bulls were easily ignored, it's said that fugitive knights found a safe haven, their knowledge and treasure protected. It is this idea of survival that has fueled their enduring legacy. The curse of Jacques de Molay, seemingly fulfilled with the swift deaths of the Pope and the King, was just the beginning. Over the centuries, the Templars have evolved from a historical fact into a powerful myth. The search for their lost treasure, a vast fortune that Philip the Fair never managed to find, has captivated adventurers for generations. Theories abound that they were the secret guardians of Christianity's most sacred relics, the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, or even the Shroud of Turin, spirited away before their downfall. This mystique has made them a cornerstone of conspiracy theories and esoteric lore. Most famously, they are linked to the origins of the Freemasons, with some Masonic rites claiming a direct lineage back to the fugitive knights. And in our modern age, the Templars are more famous than ever. They are the shadowy antagonists in video games like Assassin's Creed, the keepers of ancient secrets in novels like The Da Vinci Code, and the heroic knights in films and television. The white mantle with its blood-red cross has become a timeless symbol of the holy warrior, the secret society, and the keeper of lost knowledge. The bizarre history of the Knights Templar, it seems, is a story that is far from over. The story of the Templars is deeply intertwined with the larger saga of the Holy Wars. If you found this history fascinating, and want to uncover more of the secrets, betrayals, and epic battles of that era, then be sure to check out our video on the secrets of the Crusades right here. What do you think is the most bizarre part of the Templar story? Was it their banking system, their secret rituals, or their dramatic cursed end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love reading your theories and insights. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the medieval world here at History for Sleepyheads. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss another chapter of history's most incredible stories. Until next time, stay curious and sleep well.